Welcome to the Via Stoica podcast, your path to tranquility. This is the podcast on Stoicism, brought to you by viastoica.com, where we discuss this ancient philosophy of living the good life. Hosted by Bryce, Brendan, and Benny, we are here to help you apply Stoic wisdom to your everyday life, no matter what obstacles you're facing, whether it's work stress, relationship issues, or just the general ups and downs of life. Stoicism has something to offer us all. Is here with us, and we're going to have a nice conversation today. Brendan, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm fantastic, Benny. Looking forward to the conversation today about how we kind of apply these things we've been talking about for so long. And so I think it'll be a good conversation. I'm interested to hear your story and how in your journey in this. But let's get into it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your part, your story, your side of this as well. And obviously, we've had hours and hours of conversations online, on our spaces, on the podcast, but even in private. You know, when I came to visit you in Panama, those few times we've had hours and hours of conversations about this. But I think this is a great topic to start. And I get this asked when I go on like other podcasts as a guest. People ask me like, okay, Stoicism. So where do I start? What is the practical application of this? So I think it is a good point for an episode, right, to start. So kind of like, okay, so let's see, like, what is this? Who is this episode for? Like, who is this kind of like? What do we need to know a little bit before we start about the application? If we give it like a brief, like maybe one or two sentences.
Yeah, I think that this episode is great for someone who has that understanding of sort of the basics of what Stoicism is, the dichotomy of control, negative visualization, the practices that the Stoics have taught us. Like you're aware of them, but you maybe haven't experienced actually applying them into your life and the benefits that they can have. Maybe you've heard stories, or you have a friend or family member that's used Stoicism to improve their life, but you haven't necessarily taken that step yet. So that's really what we're going to talk about today, is taking that first step. Is kind of, you've got the instruction manual, you've studied the text, but like, how do you actually start using these things to improve your own life day to day? So to me, that's who this is for. But I wanted to hear your journey, Benny, where you started, and kind of like, when did you start actively applying the Stoic teachings to your life versus just reading about them?
I think for me, it kind of intertwined a little bit. So I think, as you mentioned, for those who read the text, but also for those who are still reading the text, right? I think that's also because I am still reading text. So this is a continuous journey about learning. And we should always remember that. I think that is one of the starting points, is like, we never know everything. Right, we always want to keep learning, and that's part of this journey. There's not going to be like, now I know it all. Here's your Stoic degree. You're a Stoic. Wear your hat, throw it in the air, and you're set for life. That's not really going to be what it's going to be like. And so for me, that was part of the journey as well. And again, anyone who's listening here and they really think like, I want to make those first steps, we are here for you, right? At Via Stoica, we offer coaching, we offer guidance in whatever way. So if you do feel like you are in that situation where you want to start and get going and really make those improvements in your life, reach out to us. We're here for you and more than happy to help. But for me, my first real epiphany, I guess I would say, I do think it was that. It was when I was reading Marcus Aurelius, and there was this quote, and I remember it very vividly, although I can't remember the exact quote because I'm horrible at that. That's just my personal trait with remembering things verbatim, but it goes like, that person is bound to act that way. It's like getting angry at a fig tree for secreting juice. And by the way, soon you'll be deaf, both of you, deaf and soon forgotten, right? I like that addition there. It's like, remember, you'll die, it's going to be there anyway. So, but I was dealing with a coworker at work back when I was working in Dubai in school, and this person was just annoying, right? It's just frustrating. And as soon as I read that quote, it just clicked, right? It's like, this is this person, right? I am getting my fingers sticky, and I'm getting angry for getting them sticky because I'm touching the tree, right? So I'm letting this person get to me. And that was really an eye-opener to show me this philosophy is this is applicable even now, right? Marcus Aurelius was just writing this 2,000 years ago. He's talking about annoying people, and he talked about this in other parts of the book. I think it was 5.1, right? Saying you're going to deal with the meddling, the annoying, all of those kind of people. And I was dealing with it, and I felt like this is up to me, right? So that's kind of where I had that first real eye-openers, like, yes, there are teachings here that I can use. And that really helped. The next day I went to work and I met this guy and I felt, okay, I cannot change you. You are, doing what you're doing. I need to deal with it better. I should not just touch that juice. And if I do, then it's just like, yeah, what else did I expect? So for me, that was my real first encounter with the actual pragmatic side of Stoicism, something that I've seen afterwards in a lot of different places, and I've got some other examples, but that's kind of my first way, and I want to hear about yours as well, right, Brendan? What is your first step in this process?
Yeah, so for me, it is similar because it does come from work as well. But for those that don't know, I have a tendency to call myself kind of a passive Stoic for the first couple years that I was aware of Stoicism. I just listened to the Daily Stoic podcast, and that was pretty much it. I didn't really apply it. I didn't journal. I wasn't reflecting. I didn't do kind of the basic Stoic practices day to day. But I do remember when I was working at the PGA Tour, I had two different bosses. So one was for the first 3 years, I had one position, and then I got another position and ended up having another boss for the last 2 years I was at the company. And my boss the first 3 years was extremely lax. He didn't care what I did, when I came in, when I left. As long as I got my work done, he was fine. As long as I got everything done, all was well. He didn't micromanage me at all, which is the way I prefer to be managed, not micromanaged. But then I got into my second position, and my boss there, she had to know what I was doing every 15 minutes of the day. I had to write it down on a journal, and it was just extreme micromanagement, extremely difficult for me to deal with. Obviously, and then coming from a guy that was so lax to someone that was not lax at all was a huge change as well. And I remember being so frustrated and so angry about this situation because I had such a great job and situation before, and now I move into this new one that great, paid more and I had more responsibility and stuff, which was great, but it wasn't enjoyable. And it wasn't until I really started to think about it of one, I chose to make this move, and I knew that the move was going to be more difficult. I knew that moving into this new department, just the nature of the department, I knew was going to be more taxing, more demanding on my time and abilities and things like that. So I knew that when I came into this. So I kind of had to sit there for a second and have accountability and say, well, I made this decision at the end of the day. And then the other bit, how I interact with my boss, I could have just gotten angry with her. I could have just been a difficult employee for the entire time I was there. But I said, that's not going to help anyone. That's not going to improve the situation. It's just going to make it worse. So let me, how do I approach working with her, understanding that she's different than I am, I'm different than she is, we view the world differently. So how do we make this work? And so we sat down and had some conversations, which didn't turn it into a perfect situation, but by far improved the situation over what I would have done before Stoicism, which is just be upset, passive aggressively get my work done, and then eventually quit in anger. But I didn't leave, I didn't leave in anger. I ended up quitting eventually and pursuing my entrepreneur career. But, I left on good terms. Everything was fine. It was all as well. But, my old Brendan, pre-Stoic Brendan would have not left it like that. So I think that was the first time that I really saw kind of the power of the practicality of the thought process of how we look at events and how we look at situations and how people treat us. We ultimately get to decide what every event means to us. And I think that was what the sword that I was wielding in that moment was saying, look, I get to decide whether this is a crappy situation for me or not. And I'm going to do what I can to make it as less crappy as possible. So that was the first time of applying it. And I think, and I like what you said too, though, because I think, it's funny as I'm even telling this story right now, it seems like, decades ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. And And I think that it's interesting because I'm still dealing with similar things to this day. I'm still having similar conversations with myself to this day, because this study of Stoicism and practicing these things day in and day out is a lifelong journey, is something that you do forever. You know, the Stoics have this idea of the Stoic sage, the person that acts perfectly in all situations and leans on the Stoic virtues in all situations. And even the most, you know, well-known Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, I would imagine would not say they did that, would say that they, of course, drop the ball every once in a while. So this process, while what we're talking about today is taking the first steps, you will continue to take those steps forever until you ultimately die, because this is a lifelong process. We are constantly changing. The world around us is constantly changing. The people in our lives are constantly changing. So therefore, we're always having to do this reflection, you know, looking back, tweaking our plan, you know, moving forward, looking back, tweaking our plan, and just doing that process over and over and over again. So I really like that, because I think that's a good thing to set off here in the beginning, saying, hey, this might be step one, but you've got thousands of steps ahead of you as you journey throughout your life.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that that's, you know, but once you get that first step going, and this is something, you know, what is that quote? You know, the journey of 10,000 steps starts with that first one. But I think it's seeing that it's possible, right? Having that confidence that you can change, that you can improve, that you can live better. That's also a very important part to have. And I think that that's why it's good to mention that once you have that, and all of this starts with having this mindset of like, I want to work on myself, right? And I like what you said, taking accountability for my own actions. Like, you know, you could have just continued, right? Passively, aggressively, being on and quitting that way, or just taking, like, you know, confronting your problem and saying, this is what it is. So when we talk about those first steps, and I'd also like to, and maybe a little bit later on, but I would like maybe see like what would be global first steps that people could take, like the behaviors that we see from people, maybe like that would be nice for at the ending, right? Where we can say like, oh, this is what most humans could, these first steps could take without even knowing Stoicism. But it is like, we talk about these first steps. We talked a little bit about the reading, right? What needs to go before that? You need to start reading a little bit, know a little bit of the concepts, right? The dichotomy of control. But what really, like, for me, for example, one of the things that comes prior to that is that observation, right? And we are observing our life in many facets, right? As I said in my example, and you said in your example, once you start to, I think that the first real practical step is an unconscious one that people don't really realize, because once you start reading the Stoics, and especially Marcus Aurelius, someone who was so analytical about his own mind, we start to do that to ourselves. And that's really where we need to go. So if someone asks me, like, where do I start? I was like, put a mirror in front of you and just analyze your exam without judgments, right? Without saying this is good or bad, because that's, you know, that may be for later, you know, but at the beginning, just look at yourself and say like, okay, these are the kind of behaviors that I don't really like too much about myself, and let's see how I can change them. And there's going to be Stoic practices that can help you. And if you do that, then you will, once you then read the text, you're still reading the text, you will find those moments, right? One great example, and I'll do this quickly, is when Epictetus said in one of his discourses, it's somewhere early, or maybe it's the handbook, I'm not sure, but when he talks about going to the baths, right? And the Roman baths, these are a social gathering. This is not like me going to the shower, and I went to hammams in Morocco where you're in this archway and you're just, you know, washing yourself with 10, 20 other people around you. And he talks about this stuff like, yeah, you know, it's going to be smelly. People are going to bump into you. You're going to get wet by other people, and maybe people will steal stuff from you. But it's your duty to stay calm and magnanimous, even in those situations, and realize what you're going to do. You're going to take a bath, and these things happen. And for me, that example really helped me when I went on the road, when I started driving. And I said, okay, you know, I'm going to go on the road. I know what kind of people I'm going to meet, and that's fine. But it's up to me to stay calm, stay safe for myself and for those other people, and that's up to me. So there's a lot of these kind of practical things, but it is with observing yourself to say, I didn't really have a lot of road rage, but I did get annoyed. and it would get me into like, oh, maybe driving faster or slower than I should have been, and that wouldn't be safe. So I knew that for myself. So once you start that observation part, then you can really get into the text and delve the things that really speak to you personally. What did you kind of experience when you started observing your behavior more?
Yeah, no, I do think that's a good point, that, you know, kind of starting with the observation. And I didn't even think about it until you said it, but this idea that, you know, because I did read Marcus Aurelius and saw, you know, read, I guess, him, you know, critiquing himself in his own journal and meditations. And by reading that, you're right, I did start doing it kind of subconsciously to myself and you know, even consciously. But, you know, critiquing my actions, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said it that exact way, like whatever, you know, or I shouldn't have done that action. Like I started to have those moments of realization. And then I think having those moments is what ultimately led to me actually starting the process of journaling. And that's when the reflection really like kind of kicked into overdrive for me. I think that for me, I was someone that avoided my emotions a lot, or tried to at least control them, bend them to my will more than I was really able to. And I think that that's what the first thing journaling kind of started to do for me, was to make me aware of my emotions and make me aware of the moments when I am calm, you know, what's going on? What am I doing? What am I thinking about? When I'm agitated, what am I doing? What am I thinking about? So I started to learn these things about myself. And I think I've heard you call it an inventory of yourself, right? So I think that's what I started to do, was build that inventory. And then accepting it. I think that's kind of was the next bit for me, was like, okay, I recognize that I have these feelings. I recognize that I get annoyed. And then I kind of have started to drill down on what annoys me, right? Maybe, you know, the specific things that annoys me. And then I have to sit there and just accept that those are going to be part of my life. And for me, that was really huge, because before I always had this thing that like I could figure out every problem in my way. Any obstacle in my path, I could figure out a way to not have it be a problem. So I thought I could just kind of make everything bend to my will. And in those times when I couldn't, that's when the friction happened. That's when my life got really difficult, and I was upset or angry or whatever. But once I started to accept, like, you know, what Marcus Aurelius says in meditations, that like, today I'm going to deal with difficult people. Today I'm going to deal with greedy people and self-centered and like, that is part of life, and you accept that. And I think that's what it did for me too, was really kind of understand that, okay, I have these issues, I have these feelings, you know, I can act one way, which could result in this outcome, or I could act in a different way, which could result in this outcome. And after having so many situations where I say, you know, taking that pause, taking that moment to reflect so that I can move forward in a virtuous way, like, those outcomes always seem to be better than the ones where I act on impulse, right? Where I act solely from emotion. And I used to think that you could only act either solely from emotion or solely from logic. And what Stoicism allowed me to understand through the reflection was that you can actually kind of have both. Like, yes, you listen to the emotions. I like to think of emotions as like almost an advisor, right? Someone on your board of advisors is telling you certain facts or data, but you don't have to necessarily act on it. And I think that's when I started to separate kind of the emotion from the situation and started to put in that stoic pause and bring in logic and reason and that sort of stuff. So the reflection was huge for me, because I think it is the way that I understood how the outcomes were changing from what they were in the past, was by reflecting on them and writing them down, and then being able to go back a week or a few months later and read that and say, oh, wow, 6 months ago I was struggling with this, and now I really have a handle on it. And seeing that progress is what made it just made me want to do it even more, made me want to dig into my issues even more and understand myself even more, with seeing the outcomes and the improvements that came along with them.
And I think that progress, that's something that we really need to see, right? And you talked about acceptance, and we mentioned the amor fati at the beginning. And that can be very difficult at the beginning to say, like, how can I accept everything, what's happening here? And I think also people who start this journey at the beginning, that's not where you need to be right now. If you are taking those first steps, that acceptance will come later down the road, and we will start to work even to loving your faith, right? That's that quote by Nietzsche, is like, we actually love it and embrace it and welcome even the things that we deem bad. It's like we welcome them. Why? Because we have been training ourselves and we want to test ourselves. But at the beginning, I think, as you mentioned, that inventory is the key. And understanding, creating that understanding, creating more awareness of who you are. And by doing that, we can work gradually taking those steps towards acceptance, towards loving it, towards even welcoming it. Say, hey, I want to, bring it on because I'm ready, right? But that's down the road. And especially if you take those first steps, that's kind of like the where we want to work towards. And I like, for example, what you said about journaling. That could be a great tool. Right, and we mentioned this in many episodes that journaling is a great tool, and if you're not really sure where to start with journaling, and again, I'm not very good at journaling. I do write my little things here and there online every day and just kind of reflect on things. But the Stoics, to have this, I think it was from the Pythagoreans, where they use this 3-step journaling where you say, let's write 3 things that I'm grateful for, 1 thing that I want to improve of, and 1 thing I want to get done next day. Right, so you can kind of have a little bit of a guideline of where to start. But I think having that inventory, that creating that deep awareness of who you are and what you want to tackle, what you want to address, I think that is very key. And one other thing that you mentioned, apart from like taking accountability, you mentioned there as well the pause. That's something that our newsletter from Via Stoica, we call it the pause, because we think that is a major tool, and that is something that we can start doing as well, like in the first steps, right? In those first steps. I don't know, what is your experience with applying, the pause? You mentioned it there briefly, but what impact did that have for you at the beginning?
No, that's a great question. But before I answer that, I want to ask you one thing. So the 3-step Stoic journaling thing, 3 things you're grateful for, and then what were the other 2?
And then 1 thing that you could have done better that day, and 1 thing that you want to do the next day.
Okay. Could have done better. I like that one. Actually, that's where, I think that's where this idea of could have done better, that's where I started, I think was, kind of like my transition into the application of these principles, where I said, where I would reflect on a situation that had happened before. Right, whether it was, with a friend or a colleague or a family member or whatever, where, a day or 2 days after the event had happened, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about it. And I say to myself, well, I could have said this and that might have worked out better. I could have done this and maybe my colleague and I wouldn't have gotten into a little argument. I could have done that and maybe my cousin wouldn't be mad at me. Right. So like I started to think of those things, and again, through that reflection process, and seeing enough times, the actual reflecting is what changed my behavior. So the reflecting on saying, wow, in this situation, I should have said, this instead of what I actually said. Doing that and reflecting on it and hearing my own voice tell me, hey, it might have been a better approach if you did this, allowed me, like I remembered that voice in my head the next time I had that same or similar problem where, hey, someone says something that rubs me the wrong way. I want to react immediately and with some wit or sarcasm or something to kind of fight back a little bit. But I pause and I tell myself, well, that's not helpful. And I already decided that last time I did this, it wasn't a good idea. So maybe I want to try a new approach this time. Oh, you know what? I'm going to say so. I'm going to try and, lead with kindness instead of the, more sharp, witty response that I like to go with. I'm going to try with kindness first and see how that goes. And then you have those experiences where like the situation just changes course. Like, and you can feel it sometimes too. There's moments where someone says something to you, you feel like you're going down this path of agitation or getting angry or upset with them. But when you take that pause, and the first time this happens, you really recognize it because you take that pause, you say, you know what, I'm going to do this instead. And you say the well-intentioned thing, right? You kill them with kindness, And then you see the person's face and mood totally change, and they walk along with you on that path of niceness and kindness. They change their tone, they change their mood. And once that happens, once you see that happen once, then it's like, it's gangbusters, right? Then you want this feeling all the time of like, why would I opt for agitation and anger when I could opt for this warm, fuzzy feeling that I have now? So I think that it is the reflection that allows you to learn from yourself. And then it's the reflection that leads to you taking the pause, to being aware of the benefits of the pause. And then, taking that pause, applying your logic and reason brings better outcomes into your life, which then makes you just want to pursue those better outcomes even more. So to me, it does definitely feel like a kind of a step process of a string. If you do this and this and this. But yeah, so that's how it worked for me. Is I really do feel like it was one step led to the next one in each part of it. And while it sometimes took, that's the thing with journaling too. And just a few notes on journaling. Like I took, years easily to actually start journaling, because I had this idea that it had to be, I have to go write paragraphs and they have to be well written and they have to be, I have to come up with some amazing epiphany or something. And no, you don't. Where I had the best luck and had the most, I returned to the page the most was in the very beginning of when I started actually journaling. I'd say the beginning of my actual journaling, because I think I picked up a journal like probably 10, 12 times before this actually worked. But I literally would just write down how I'm feeling. I would just say, today I'm feeling sad. That was all I did in the journal. And I just started doing that. Today I'm feeling happy. Today I'm feeling sad. Today I'm feeling upset. Whatever I was feeling, I wrote it down. And then after doing that for a few days, then I just naturally started writing more. I'm feeling happy because blah, 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 blah. I'm excited about this. I got this plan coming up, whatever. I'm feeling sad because this event happened to me and I did this. And I write everything down. And it mainly just became like a collection of stories and me kind of talking to myself. And then that is, once I then started to realize like, wow, this is so beneficial. I'm having these conversations with myself. I'm working through these problems on the page. And it was just so enjoyable that I was like, anytime I had a problem after that, first thing I do is pick up a piece of paper and start writing, because that's where I sort out my issues and my problems now. So it definitely was a long process for me, a long journey for me to get to the place where I actually journal on a semi-regular basis. But even to this day, like I don't even do it every day. There's been moments where I go a week without doing it at all. It's not perfect, right? It's not perfection, but it's progress. And that's what we're ultimately trying to work towards. But yeah, if you have these things going on and you're struggling with how to journal, how to pull apart and really examine your past self and how you interact in certain events and things like that, then we do have coaching in Via Stoica, and both Benny and I have been coaching for a while now, and we have all sorts of clients if you need recommendations or anything like that. But I do think that it is an amazing journey, and the ROI on taking time to understand yourself and speak with yourself and have conversations with yourself is really, really important. That's what philosophy calls us to do is know thyself. So that's what we try to do here on the podcast, and know ourselves a little bit better.
Good stuff
for you. What was it for you, and how, and give us a little insight into the when Benny started making observations, and what were maybe some of the things that you learned from those observations.
Well, for me, and just to kind of, piggyback on that pause, that was one of the other tools that really helped me, like even in small things where you feel like you're getting agitated, like you're stumbling your toe, or just feel like you're getting angry, and I realize like this is really not necessary. So for me, just taking a deep breath, I feel I'm at that stage now where just taking a deep breath really helps me, just to kind of take that. And obviously this is something that is a process, right? Sometimes if you do get angry, sometimes you do need to go take a walk, right? Go away and just, take a hike, as they say, right? Just take a hike. And, but go away from it, right? Remove yourself from the trigger. And that's that observation part as well, where you see that this is triggering me. I don't have to lean into this, right? This is maybe someone who's trying to get out. It was at me, just trying to, get me angry or whatever. So that's a choice as well. And that's where we need to take that part of responsibility. And responsibility is also a big part of me that really helped me to take agency. For example, take me out of that victim role instead of saying, oh, look at why me, or just saying, no, why not me? But that's where that pause really helped me to say, I can now take a deep breath and just kind of look at things from the bright side. And I've been like, I remember walking in my school in Dubai where just the kids going frantic. It was just chaos, just like kids fighting, breaking stuff down, and the teachers were all just stressed. And my other Western teachers, right, the others were Arabic. My other Western is like, Benny, how come you're just smiling and just walking around here with a smile on your face? It's like, well, look at it. Look at how absurd this is. Look at how crazy this is. This isn't normal, right? So I think it's also kind of looking at life from a positive and a kind of with some humor in it, and just looking at the craziness of it all. That'll help. That at least helps me kind of not become sad, right? I do want to help make it better, but I also know, like, at one point where my influence ends. That's something that I've learned. Like, okay, this is where my influence ends, and this is where I just become a spectator. I just like let it ride. Just look at what's going on. Even in traffic, the example is like sometimes you see people driving crazy, like, what's happening here? This is crazy. And then sometimes these people, we don't know what's happening, right? So one thing that you mentioned is that the kindness, you can just ask someone, hey, how are you doing? Right? When they're angry, it's like, and I used to work in restaurants and with angry customers, you would just sit them down and just like, hey, are you okay? Just, tell me what's going on, right? Calm them down. So for me, that's kind of where it started a little bit for me. And just, where I really started to accumulate those practices and really, find my way to that calmer life. And I think that's also, once you start with one practice and you find more and they start to connect, you can see them in more different situations where you can apply them, you can mix them. And that's when you get to those next steps, right? That's when you really start, and then it starts to compound. Then it starts to really grow, and you start to really help them. They start to help you more, and you get to practice them. I think that's the key. Besides all of this, is then doing it consistently, right? Once you get that practice going, the same thing with journaling, it's maybe a little bit different because you said like you can do it here and off. But I think at the beginning, it's good to kind of do it consistently to get that kind of thought going. And afterwards, once you get more practice, you can pick it up here and there and still when you need it. But having that consistent effort really helps you to get these ideas in your head, and to also remember that you can fall back on them afterwards, after you're more in tune on them. And the great thing is about some of them become more unconscious, right? You start doing them without even knowing it. And that's really where you want to be at. So I think that's kind of like where I started with the observing and seeing that they really helped me. And the proof what I had, and this is kind of what I use the compass, what people say, like, how do you know that this is the right way? It's my intuition telling me, like, I feel calm, right? This feels good. Like where I used to get angry and I was like, I'm calm. I can oversee the situation. I can kind of know what I'll have to do, and things don't affect me as much anymore. That's when I say, like, this is working. This is something that I can actually use to improve my life. So that's kind of where I went on this journey.
Yeah. It's I like what you said too about comedy. I think that's one of the lesser known. You want to talk about practices that Stoics use. I do think that finding the humor in the situation and being able to make yourself laugh at sometimes, let's just say, difficult events in your own life can make them a lot easier to digest. But one of the things that doesn't get brought up a lot when you talk about Stoic practices, dichotomy of control, negative visualization, that's there, but making fun of yourself works too. But as long as we balance it with temperance. But so this has been, I really think that this is, the beauty of this situation is it's not a linear thing, right? It's not a line, it's a circle more than anything, because you're going to come back and do everything all over again. You're going to observe, you're going to test out the new things, you're going to observe again, you're going to see the outcomes, you're going to keep and it's just this constant process of tweaking and trial and error and things like that. So, that is the journey. And the interesting part of it is it's not, we call this, taking your first steps, but like at the end of the day, the steps never stop. Like you're just constantly taking steps. You're constantly tweaking and this is the process of improvement. A lot of people, I've heard people talk about Stoicism as it, what is the purpose of Stoicism? It's to guide you on this lifelong pursuit of improvement. And I really think that's what it is. So I think that is the continuation too of the practices. Like not only the practices of actively doing them in your life and applying them in your life, but going back to the ancient texts. Like I've reread Meditations, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 times. And I think rereading it is kind of when you start to really dig into it, you understand these things even more. That's where it can really grow even more. And that just continues on your journey. So this has been a really great journey for me personally. Like I love, I've been, from the day I became aware of Stoicism to now is probably about 8 years. And it's been fantastic. And the person I was 8 years ago to the person I am today is completely different human. And my life is completely different. And the way I view the world is completely different. And it's through but it all happened in small changes, small, subtle changes over time, ultimately led to this situation. I wouldn't say it was like an overnight thing, I don't believe anything worth having comes easy. And this calm, rational mindset that I have now didn't come easy, but I'm still working on it. I'm still improving it. And it's still a lifelong journey.
Yeah. And as we wrap it up, this episode, that question that I asked you earlier, what do you think is a practice that most people in general could use from Stoicism? What do you think that would be something that you could just like to humanity is like, try this, humanity, and let's see if we can make it just a little bit better?
I do think the idea of negative visualization, it can be really helpful for most people. I mean, to kind of like, especially when it's an experience that you go through a lot, like driving to work. Like obviously people do that every single day or at least 5 days a week. And so if you know that is a very agitating event for you, kind of close your eyes, imagine yourself in the car, imagine the things that go on, imagine the things that piss you off, and then imagine yourself being calm in those moments. How are you going to calm yourself down? Are you going to play music? Are you going to say a little mantra in your head? Are you going to call a friend? Like whatever you need to do to get to that calmness, because once you get there, and once you can find yourself calm in an environment that is something that upsets you, like driving in your car or being at a loud event or whatever the event is that like causes you distress. Once you start to feel calm in that event, even if it's in your imagination, you will still calmer, slightly more calm in the actual event itself. And if you just keep practicing that over and over again, you become more, accepting of it and aware of that these things are going to happen. What are your reactions? So to me, that is the easiest one, I think, for anyone to apply, for anyone to use. And I think it also works for really any situation, especially ones that are repetitive in our lives that we know occur weekly or daily or monthly. We can practice those things. We can practice those events and practice feeling those emotions and how we are going to kind of work with them. And because we don't want to fight against our emotions, we want to work with our emotions. So kind of practicing it before the actual event is a good way to improve on that. But what about you?
Yeah, no,
and that to share with the people and then see which practice they might use.
Yeah, and now as you were talking, and I was thinking, for me, and maybe that's a little bit aligned with that, is kind of to try to withhold or pause your judgment on things around you. That's for me is one that I think that people could use a little bit more instead of saying this person is bad or this action is bad. Just kind of, applying that pause again, but then focusing more on the judgment of things. And that's something that I feel that people are very keen to jump to conclusions and to make their opinions made, especially on other people. And when we're living in a more international, multicultural world where it's easy to say, oh, you're from this part of the world, so you must be like this. And that's just everybody as an individual prove themselves who they are. And you don't have to like everybody. but base it on who they are as a person and not who they are as like a bigger thing. So for me, that's kind of where I feel like we could make it a little bit more of an indent if we just withhold our judgment a little bit more until we know more facts and so we know the truth, what's going on. And we had a great episode on judgment as well earlier. And if you are listening and you want to like, hey, you know, these practices sound great, where do I start? We did make an episode about the books to read. And, you know, if you go all the way back to the first episode, you can listen to what Stoicism is, the 4 virtues, you know, wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, and all of that great stuff. And as Brendan said, you know, we have coaching on Via Stoica. We have everything available for you there, workshops. So you do want to apply this. And if you say, hey, these guys, you know, we've been listening to Bryce, Brendan, and Benny for a while, like, I want to make this happen in my life, you know, reach out. You know, we're here to help. So I don't know if you have any final thoughts. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up, this lovely episode.
Oh, no. I mean, one thing I did, I guess just as a bonus practice we'll add in, because I think the judgment one is really good. But one thing that I did too, and I think they kind of go hand in hand, is the Stoics call us to be conscious and aware of our language and to use language properly. So I think human beings, we have a tendency, because I used to do this all the time, of catastrophizing or using extreme language to discuss things. Especially when judging people, like, oh, you found out that this person did one, you know, action. Well, oh, now they're the worst person. They're terrible. You can't trust them. Like, we really should not use such extreme language because it pollutes our own brain. It pollutes our own perspective and things like that. But, you know, Marcus Aurelius talked about, he's like, it's not fine wine, it's crushed grapes, right? Like, fine wine is sounds lovely and fancy, but crushed grapes, crushed with the bare feet of the vineyard workers, like, is it really that good? So just to kind of reinforce this idea of perspective, because I do think that's kind of what goes in line too with the judgment thing. But yeah, using more basic language to describe things, or like if you're in pain, it's not, oh my God, my leg's going to fall off. It's, oh, I have some pain in my knee and eventually it will heal. So you speak to yourself in a more calm, rational way, which then naturally makes you more calm and rational. So a little last minute one to leave the people with.
I like that bonus one. And just to really, like, even, for example, for me, like to eliminate even foul language I know, like, if I use bad words or bad language, that sets my mind off in a different mindset, more negative towards other people. But that just, you know, I do sometimes use it, but I try to minimize it as much as I can. But I like that, you know, that bonus little there, you know, the language that we use and how we speak to ourselves. I think that and to others, I think that is extremely important. So, yeah, awesome, Brandon. Great episode today. I think, you know, I've rekindled some of those practices, and I'm gonna, you know, journal a little bit on this again, and just like to say, okay, where do I need to pick up, and what are these practices that I kind of need to work on a little bit more?
Excellent. Well, good luck, Benny, and let us know how it goes.
I will. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Via Stoica podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and leaving a review. Your feedback will help us reach more like-minded people on the journey to self-improvement. If you want to get in touch with us or find more information, you can go to viastoica.com, your one-stop platform for all things Stoicism and living better. And remember, virtue is the only good.